check, check.
Videos.
Hello?
So she's coming. No, no, no. You can speak. The mic is a laptop.
Oh, hello.
No, you can take it.
Actually, so they don't talk to each other. No, they will. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Ma'am, it takes 2 minutes. Hello, mic test 1, 2, 3. Hello.
Hi. You see the point is we can have
I got pen drive. Ali, pen drive da. Pen drive. Any pen drive is an yes. With card reader.
I have a question.
That's okay.
Oh, yes, next one.
Ma'am has a pen drive. Ma'am has.
I have. Yeah,
Use. Make it down. Giant. I'm sorry.
I've given the pen drive. Yeah.
Different laptop.
It's called Bangalore. I'm sorry. Then you can answer. Yes, okay.
No, ma'am. Hey, come on, check it out. People is.
Yes, okay. Yes, yes. That's it. Oh. Yes.
Pen name?
It's called Bangalore, yes. Yes, you can, this seems well. Yeah, so apparently it works.
Can see on the side is correct.
Yeah, we'll be okay. We'll be fine. Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
You put it in the right mode?
No, it's
I can keep this file here and then.
no,
speak.
ma'am.
No? Then how will I hold the papers? No, not like that, like this, something.
It's not coming, then after the interaction will be continued.
Yeah. No, but why I can't keep it on the computer, this file and read it out? Why, Maharaj?
If you touch anything cable,
Oh,
any keyboard, if you touch means Zoom will disconnect.
Should be okay, ma'am, this is the file because I have.
yeah, that's fine. No, I'll hold it.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to one and all present here, as well as online, to the International Seminar on Healthy Aging, which is being organized as part of the Diamond Jubilee celebration of our St. John's National Academy of Health Sciences. This event is being orchestrated by the Department of Physiology and the Center for Research on Aging and Geriatrics, and exemplifies our dedication to advancing the knowledge on gerontology. Our esteemed speakers for the day bring with them a wealth of expertise and innovation, and I'm sure you are as excited as I am to explore the realms of healthy aging along with them. Please note there is a little bit of a shuffle in our speaker sequence, and Dr. Anime Scholes is going to be presenting first, and Dr. Arvind will be presenting second. But without further ado, let me please invite Dr. Sucharita, Professor and Head of Department of Physiology, St. John's Medical College, to introduce this event and introduce our first speaker. Ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. A very warm welcome to all of you. I'm here to just give you a brief overview of this seminar on healthy aging. Human lifespan significantly impacts society, and I think all of us agree about that. An aging population affects healthcare planning, lifestyle decision, as well as government and economic policies. Just to highlight that some of the statistical models which are emerging have indicated that by 2100, the lifespan of the individual will be increasing to 130 years. So it could be said that one of the greatest success of public health in the last 100 years is adding years to our lives. But the challenge is to make those added years healthy. So aging healthy or successfully is not about having disease-free scenario, but as the World Health Organization defines, it's a process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables the well-being of an older age. As we are celebrating the decade of healthy aging, it is important to consider the factors contributing towards healthy aging, including genetic, lifestyle, and environmental factors. We do not have answers for all the questions. However, we hope that by having such discussions as part of today's seminar, we could sort of go forward in this direction. In this context, we have planned sessions revolving around healthy aging. The fantastic orators today are experts in the field who will be enlightening us about various aspects of healthy aging. With ongoing work at the Department of Physiology and Center of Aging and Geriatrics, it is indeed a proud moment for us to host this seminar. And I would like to place on record, we are very happy and thank you all for joining us on today's event. It is indeed a proud moment for me to introduce Professor Anami Scholes, whom I have known for more than a decade now. But our active interaction and collaboration started in 2020 during the COVID era. Our interactions and deliberations have always resulted in scientific output, which is due to the common interest which both of us share. And she is a fantastic researcher, which you are going to hear from her today. It is indeed a privilege for me to read out Dr. Anami Scholes' credential for you. Professor Dr. Anami Scholes has pioneered the introduction of metabolism and nutrition into the medical world of respiratory diseases. She has performed groundbreaking and innovative research and translated this into patients and medical doctors, a true bench to bedside story. She initially focused on COPD, being one of the upcoming chronic diseases at that time. Guided by her translational research, she additionally positioned metabolism and nutrition beyond palliative care for enhanced cancer treatment efficacy. Recently, she successfully initiated nationwide projects extending this metabolic perspective to contribute to COVID-19 recovery and long-term health implications. Dr. Scholes was the first to prove disturbances in whole body and skeletal muscle energy and protein metabolism of COPD patients, and to show the significance of altered body composition in understanding chronic disease heterogeneity and progression. Her team covers whole spectrum from mechanistic studies in experimental in vitro and vivo models to clinical validation of deeply phenotyped patients. Dr. Scholes has translated basic research insights subsequently into tailored, innovative, synergistic, multimodal treatments, which she studied in a series of international randomized controlled trials in COPD. Besides, she initiated several nationwide consortia to unravel the lung muscle crosstalk in tissue repair and restoration of mitochondrial health for the prevention of progressive muscle and lung tissue damage in COPD. With her innovative forefront metabolic research, she developed a holistic view of chronic non-communicable disease and bridged the gap between science and clinic. Her research findings were incorporated in numerous consensus statements and clinical guidelines for COPD, age-related sarcopenia, and cancer cachexia. Her translational research has boosted the development and fine-tuning of targeted nutritional exercise and pharmacological intervention in cancer cachexia. She has validated and applied technological innovation in muscle and adipose tissue assessment. More recently, CT imaging and artificial intelligence, which are optimally integrated in risk assessment and treatment evaluation in both COPD, lung cancer, and recently COVID. Professor Scholes has published more than 400 international scientific publications with more than 50 book contributions. Her H citation index is 96. In 2022, she was ranked 16th in the Netherlands and 670 of the best female scientists in the world. It is indeed a privilege for me to invite Dr. Anami Scholes. And ladies and gentlemen, please put a round of applause to welcome Professor Scholes.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and a great honor to be here today. I have to say to be here again today, because the first time that I visited St. John's was in 2008, so 15 years ago. And I think a lot has changed during those 15 years. A lot has changed in society, and also in culture, but also in the way I see now that St. John's has further developed its research strategy. And I embrace this very much because I see a lot of similarities in the way we approach this from Maastricht. What I would like to do during this lecture is go back in time and tell you a little bit about my scientific journey, which, as was explained by Dr. Sucharita, started from a focus on chronic respiratory disease. But I think that a lot of the insights that I gained myself throughout the years can also be very valuable to tackle the aging problem, or I would say to prepare ourselves in prevention and treatment towards, let's say, a healthy aging for a lot of people in society. Let me see if I... Oh, where do I... Yes, oh, not this one. Oh, okay, yes. Which one? This one? Yeah, I did it. Okay, no problem. When I will talk about nutrition and metabolism in chronic lung disease, then I think we have to realize that there is a bidirectional relationship. The food that we are eating is being metabolized and will also influence our lung health. But we also know that chronic lung diseases may influence our energy and intermediary metabolism, which may result in the need for adaptations to our diet, or even maybe a specific nutritional supplementation. But tell me a little bit about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, because that is the disease that we investigated mostly of the chronic respiratory diseases. Although, again, I think that the insights from COPD may also be transferable to other chronic diseases that are prevalent here in India. When we talk about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, most of the population, it's better known as on the one hand, chronic bronchitis or lung emphysema, but overall it's characterized by a persistent airflow limitation and respiratory symptoms, including dyspnea, cough, sputum, and all resulting in impairments in exercise tolerance. We do know that the disease is not curable yet, so the treatment is aimed at reducing these symptoms, trying to reduce hospitalizations, because we know they are a great burden for the patient and its environment. And a major target of intervention is also to try to improve the quality of life and the survival of the patients with COPD. However, because we know that the treatment, that the disease is not yet curable, it's important to try to put also more attention to prevention of this chronic disease. And why is this needed? Because the burden of COPD globally is high, and it's also increasing. And here you see the figures of the expected increase in India, which is huge. So we need to be prepared for that. Interestingly, that there is a relationship between chronic lung disease and nutrition and metabolism was already known for a long time. In 1898, in the first textbook, Diseases of the Lung, there was already mentioning of the potential role of nutrition in the management of patients with COPD. It was already seen that particularly the emphysematous patients could be emaciated and withered. It was interestingly at that time considered that if these patients would have problems related to their disease, it would be better not to exercise because that might result in dyspnea. What is also interesting at that time is that already there was attention for dietary recommendation. Only they were targeting the bowels, so not other tissues that we are now primarily targeting for improvement of these patients. And there was even mentioning at that time of nutritional supplementation, cod liver oil and iron in combination with spirits of chloroform. But not that much was done in that respect. Another interesting paper, at least for me to motivate me to go into this direction, was a paper published in 1968. And it was describing that not all COPD patients are the same, that there are different, let's say, phenotypes when you simply look at the patients. And they were described as, on the one hand, the blue bloater, the bronchitic phenotype, and on the other hand, the pink puffer, the emphysematous phenotype. And at that time, the first time, also the term cachexia was managed in this respect. So I was very motivated when I started my PhD research to try to improve the overall quality of life and physical condition of those patients that were suffering from weight loss and muscle wasting in COPD. And was interested to what extent nutritional supplementation could be of benefit. So that's when I started. I think we have really provided a lot of evidence that it's important to take care of these patients and not to accept the unintended weight loss, because if you take care of these patients, it will improve in their overall well-being, but even also in their survival. But if you look at this iceberg, you see there's a lot below what you can see. And in this presentation, I want also particularly pay attention to the potential of nutrition and metabolism in the context of what I will mention and explain later, indicated and selective prevention. So not only care-related prevention, but that there is more potential if we consider this role. But then we have to realize that COPD is more than a respiratory disease. It is a disease that affects other tissues and organs. And this can be direct effects of the lung disease, for instance, on the muscle tissue or on the bone tissue, but it can also be because often patients with a chronic disease like COPD develop more other chronic diseases. So the influence of presence of comorbidity on the overall progression and quality of life of the patients. And what we also know is, okay, there is this typical emphysematous cachectic COPD patient profile that we all have in our head when you but there is more, because not all the COPD patients are the same. There's a whole range in what I call metabolic risk profile within this disease. So the syndromes like obesity can be present, sarcopenia, as well as cachexia. And we know that the presence of either one of these syndromes, metabolic syndromes, is related to the severity of the disease. So you see in cachexia more in the advanced disease stages, but we also know that these metabolic profiles in this chronic disease may be influenced by lifestyle, diet, physical activity, next to smoking, as well as aging. So with the aging of the population, you will also see that this will affect the quality of life as well as the disease progression in COPD. What is also important is when you only look at the patient, sometimes you do not know enough about the metabolic disturbances that are present in these patients. So ideally, it would be, first of all, it's important to measure body weight, body mass index, body weight changes. But if possible, it's very useful to also have a measure of body composition. And there are relatively simple measures that can be used also in the field, like skin fold thicknesses or bioelectrical impedance. But there are also advanced methods which can be useful in advanced clinical care. For instance, a DEXA scan, which gives additional information, not only about the amount of fat tissue and muscle tissue, but also about the distribution, as well as additional information about bone health that can be also impaired in patients with COPD. And what is very interesting also is that now we know that from regular clinical chest CT scans, you can derive a lot more information than only information regarding the lung pathology. We have done a series of studies where from regular CT scans, we obtained information about the body composition, the muscle, the adipose tissue, and also the distribution between visceral and subcutaneous fat. And that is very useful information from a clinical perspective. So I can imagine in future, when these methodologies become more available or being more used, in particularly also with new AI tools, that it might be possible to incorporate them in clinical care for specific subgroups. When I go to the different risk profiles that are present in COPD, then I start with abdominal obesity. We all know that abdominal obesity increases the cardiovascular risk. And that is also the case in patients that have COPD. We know that this abdominal obesity is more present in the chronic bronchitic phenotype. So in line with the very early papers that were published in the 1960s. What, however, is also important that we have shown in a systematic review that indeed there is an increased prevalence of metabolic syndrome in COPD, which is also when you compare it with comparable health, age and body mass, gender-matched subjects. And it's the leading cause of death in mild to moderate COPD. What we do not know, and may be important, it's already particularly important in our Western society, but may be important in future also in the Indian society, is that we do not know whether this abdominal obesity may contribute to acceleration of the lung decline that is seen in patients with COPD. And this could be due to epigenetic mechanisms, as well as to the influence of meta-inflammation, inflammation that also can be derived from the adipose tissue, which can influence immune responses and in that sense also lung health. What is important, and also we demonstrated in COPD, and may not be that surprising for you, is that we showed in different studies that when you have normal weight COPD patients and you compare them to age and matched control subjects, that there is an adipose redistribution. So on a CT scan, we showed that at a similar body mass index, a similar subcutaneous adipose tissue, that there was relatively more visceral adipose tissue. And this is a graph from the Health ABC study, which was performed in the United States. And we clearly showed also in these patients an additional influence of physical activity and poor quality diet on this metabolic profile, which was associated indeed with more systemic inflammation and also the increased cardiovascular disease risk. So that is one. But even interestingly is that we were interested in the cardiometabolic risk profile of the COPD patients with a low muscle mass, with sarcopenia. And we showed in these patients that the subgroup of patients that were abdominally obese, so that they, as you can see on this slide, clearly had an increased cardiometabolic risk in terms of glucose, insulin, HOMA, and the proportion of patients with metabolic syndrome. So in the Netherlands, where we did this study, this was really being considered as surprising, because normally somebody with such a body mass index you would not consider to be at risk. Maybe this is not that much an eye-opener in your population, because I think you also already, there's the term of the thin fat phenotype, but still I think important to consider in the overall characterizations of patients at risk. These then a very important problem in COPD is sarcopenia, and sarcopenia at an age where you would not expect it. So at an earlier age than the sarcopenia that is associated with older age. And so we do know that when a COPD patient is sarcopenic, that it really impairs the physical function of these patients and the well-being. What is interesting is when you take muscle biopsies of these patients, and we have done a lot of studies, you see that not only the muscle mass is affected, but also the oxidative capacity of the muscle. And in that way, it's a bit distinct with what you see in aging subjects. So one of the hypotheses could be, I'll come back to that later, that this sarcopenia and COPD in a way reflects accelerated aging. So, and the question is this decrease in oxidative capacity of the muscle and perhaps changes in oxidative mitochondrial metabolism, is this a driver, a cause of the accelerated muscle loss that can be seen in these patients? Because that, or is it the decrease in the mitochondrial capacity? Is it an adaptation to the loss in the muscle mass that is seen? What is interesting, and I just show you this slide, is I was mentioning that maybe these metabolic changes that we see in these patients might give insight in aging, because indeed, when taking blood samples and we measured the telomere length as well as the expression of sirtuin-1, then indeed you see that COPD patients have lower levels compared to smoking individuals and compared to never smoking controls. So indications that the aging process is in these patients already accelerated. Then there is, like I started, this specific phenotype of patients that suffer from, let's say, pulmonary cachexia, and this is clearly related to emphysema in different ways. We know that the hyperinflation of the lungs may cause difficulties breathing, may influence the energy metabolism. And we also have shown that this loss of oxidative capacity is even worse in this subgroup of cachectic patients. And whether this is related to, for instance, hypoxia or intermittent hypoxia is quite likely, but difficult to prove in a human situation. What is important, however, is that this unintended weight loss, which still is a very, in nowadays society, in nowadays obesogenic society, is still a very strong predictor for prognosis, as is shown in this last this study that was performed a few years ago in the UK. that this weight loss may also already start in these patients at an earlier stage of their disease. So it's important not to ignore this, but immediately try to treat it, because then it may be even easier to do that. If obviously the patient, if you see the patients, because often the patients themselves wait by showing up until the situation has deteriorated already. We did, as Dr. Sucharita said, a lot of translational research in trying to find targets for intervention in these patients. So we took muscle biopsies and tried to characterize these muscle biopsies in a comprehensive way by characterizing the processes that are involved in muscle protein synthesis, muscle protein breakdown, as well as involved in this loss of oxidative capacity. And what we have shown, I won't go into detail by showing you all sorts of study results, but the response when a patient is in a clinically stable condition is different from the response when the patients are in an acute condition or recovering from an acute condition. So in an acute condition, we know that there is a disturbed protein balance due to a decrease in protein synthesis and an increase in proteolysis involving the ubiquitin protein pathway. And we also know that the regenerative capacity of the muscle is decreased. What we saw in patients with stable disease, we interestingly saw also an increased protein breakdown, but via another process called autophagy, and an adaptive increase in protein synthesis, and even an adaptive increase in markers of muscle regeneration. So apparently there is a muscle remodeling process ongoing in these patients, so the muscle tries to cope with let's say the catabolic triggers that are put on the muscle. And in a way, this is a positive message, I think, because if there is an ongoing muscle remodeling, then you can try to stimulate this at the right moment. So this to me shows that where initially for instance, in advanced cancer, we know that patients lose muscle very rapidly. And there is this, let's say, fatalistic approach and involvement because of this increased protein breakdown via this process of proteolysis. This is not the case in the clinically stable condition. And this means that in the clinically stable condition, there's really room for improvement for the patients. We also extensively investigated the bioenergetics of the muscle, and I won't go into detail, but we did show that this loss of specific oxidative type 1 fibers and loss of mitochondria is associated with a decrease in so-called mitochondrial biogenesis, an increase in mitophagy, and only in a subset of patients, the very advanced patients, you can see really dysfunctional mitochondria. Again, why were we interested in these processes? Because they may provide targets for intervention. Interesting also what we learned, and may be relevant not only for COPD, but for more chronic diseases, that there is the muscle-brain axis. So we saw these decreases in these regulators of muscle oxidative metabolism, like PGC1 and the PPARs, but they are also involved in the muscle in the conversion of kynurenine to kynurenic acids via stimulation of this so-called CUT enzyme. And why is it important to tell you this? Because if this conversion takes place, then kynurenic acid cannot leave the muscle, but kynurenine can leave the muscle, go to the brain, and has an influence on the mental health status of the brain. And why do I tell you this? Because also in COPD, you may not realize this, we have shown that in many of these patients, already cognitive performance can be impaired. cognitive flexibility, verbal memory, working memory, for example. And this is important to consider because if this has been shown to have an implication, not only on the quality of life of the patients, but also if you give them a specific intervention, then there's an increased risk of dropout for this intervention if we do not pay attention to this. And it overall can impair the compliance to medical treatments that are given to the patients. So I think a little bit an underestimated, at least in our country, an underestimated aspect to consider. And as I already mentioned in the beginning, we know that all these catabolic triggers, the dyspnea, the inflammation, the effects of the disease on physical activity, dietary intake, and so on, it all comes together when they are hospitalized for an acute exacerbation. And then on top of them, they are giving some treatments that are beneficial for the lungs, but may be catabolic for instance, for the muscle. So that's a moment where perhaps also the care can be optimized as much as possible to stimulate also the recovery after an acute hospitalization. Because at least in the Netherlands, often this period is forgotten, whereas for the overall quality of life for the patients, this is very important. So what we, at the European Respiratory Society, there was a working group on nutrition and the lung, and we were thinking, okay, this is all very nice, these insights, but how can we translate them to clinical practice? So there should be also an awareness of the clinician, of the caregivers, that when they have a patient, that the risk there may be an metabolic risk, that if you also take care of that metabolic risk, this will have an overall effect. So here we summarize together, if it is possible to have information on the body mass index, of the weight changes, and ideally also of the body composition, then you can identify the risk profile of the individual patients. So patients with a low risk in green, patients with an increased cardiovascular risk, and patients with a decreased physical performance and an increased mortality risk, but also this complicated group of patients that are affected in both ways. They already experience problems and a decreased overall physical performance, but they also may need to be aware that they have an increased cardiometabolic risk. Ideally, obviously, we would like to have one biomarker or two biomarkers in easily applicable to identify this risk. But still, I mean, using relatively simple tools of body composition, it is already possible to obtain some more information of your patient than without doing that. And that's what that's one aspect. So there's the patients that really need nutritional support. And then there is a group of patients in which the metabolic profile warrants counseling for lifestyle to target those specific metabolic risk profiles. An important factor in this counseling is that they keep a healthy lifestyle. And obviously, physical activity is important, and sometimes patients may need specific exercise training. And this can be a wide range of exercises. Now, ideally, you would like to let them do the exercise that they are used to in daily life. Walking, strength train, walking, that's, I think, in daily life here. And then there's the question what you can do more during a certain period of more strenuous exercises. This can be exercise training, but okay, in the Netherlands, you can put patients on a bicycle because we all cycle. That's not the case here, and I would not advise it in Bangalore. But it's there's a lot of interest also in strength training, and I'll come back to that later, where there's also a clear link with the aging. What we do realize, so we all know that this is quite generic advice. But then there's a problem in those patients with chronic lung disease, particularly if they have an advanced stage, that they are simply not able to exercise. And for that, we and others did a lot of studies. Are there alternatives? For instance, neuromuscular electrical stimulation, or performing exercise with additional oxygen, or even a sort of vibration method. So that is one opportunity to try to tailor the exercise intervention to the specific patients, which I think is really in the advanced patients, could give additional value. But we also thought, is there further potential for nutritional modulation? So not supplementation. The basis of supplementation is often, when people are losing weight, calories, and there's a lot of argumentation for protein intake. But are there specific nutrients that we should consider to be involved too? So because we do have the engine, you can try to get this engine as strong as possible. And for that, the exercise is important, but sometimes it can help if you fuel the engine with the right nutrition. And what I think is, at least in our country also, is being ignored, is that there may be specific deficiencies of patients that may require further attention. And at least in COPD, these deficiencies, vitamin D, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, prebiotics, and branched-chain amino acids have been identified to have an influence. So that's one angle to try to optimize the intervention for the patients that really need it and really benefit from such a boost. Another one could be to provide specific nutraceuticals. So to give something extra, which is often being done in top sports, like resveratrol, nitrate, creatine, coenzyme Q10, and HMB. What we did, I'm not sure if I have this slide. Yes, I'm not going to in detail, but in our group, we have done a lot of controlled clinical trials with a whole set of mechanistic and functional outcomes to find if a specific nutrient could be of added value to add on top of optimizing the quality of the diet and targeting the deficiencies. For instance, we did studies investigating the added value of resveratrol and nitrate. And the design of the study depended on the research question. It could be a randomized controlled trial. It could also be a crossover trial. And then in the laboratory situation, you could really try to find out, does this have added value or not? And I think it's important because, you should not give interventions that are not proven. Regarding treatments, and I have to say, maybe unfortunately, but there is not one magic pill. If with whatever you give, that will really make the difference. So we thought, okay, how can we perhaps optimize nutritional supplementation, so the basic calories if needed and protein, by also targeting the deficiencies. And we did so with a specific focus on vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and the quality of the protein with specific amino acids. Again, I'm not going to bother you with a lot of these specific study specifics. I mean, you can read them in the literature, but it is interesting that in two completely different approaches, one a randomized controlled trial in which patients were only giving the nutritional intervention compared to a control intervention, as well as in a study where we gave the intervention and combined it with exercise training to see if it has added value on top of exercise, we did see evidence based on hard clinical endpoints. What we also thought is important, that's on the left hand below, is you can do an intervention for 1 month or for 2 months and you see a benefit, but it's also important to see if you can do an intervention for a longer time. So the study on the left-hand side below was a study that after a period of controlled pulmonary rehabilitation, including nutrition and exercise, we also had a maintenance period up till 1 year after the controlled intervention. And it learned us a lot about the feasibility of the intervention, but it also showed, and that was interesting, that the added value of the nutritional support became more clear when the period of follow-up was longer than just in the immediate follow-up. And you can imagine that if you give somebody really a supervised training program, then it's hard to show the added value of the nutritional intervention. But that was nicely the case. Well, we are now continuing, just for your information, we are now halfway a new intervention study where also we really want to have the patients that we see in real life follow-up of 1 year. And we're also specifically interested in what such an intervention does during the treatment and the follow-up of hospitalizations for an acute exacerbation. So we know quite a lot about the added value of combined physical activity, exercise, interventions, nutritional support in these patients with COPD that lose weight, in the patients with COPD that suffer from sarcopenia. But how to translate those insights to Asian India? And for that, it's really interesting that we started in the beginning of just before COVID with Rohini and Shinjini with 2 PhD projects. And the aim was, on the one hand, to try to implement these types of interventions to, on the one hand, COPD patients, on the other hand, another chronic disease, the diabetes patients, but also to discuss, okay, what's known and what could be hurdles, what could be barriers, how to consider the situation as it is here in India, which is clearly different. And I think it's this cross-fertilization of insights is very important. So these are very nice reviews that I can recommend to you that give an insight in where are we now, you now, in India in this respect. What is also interesting, I have been here the past 3 days, and that was very informative for me too. So we discussed during the past 3 years, every 3 weeks we had our discussions. So you get to know each other, but you also get to know more and more about this specific situations, comparing the Netherlands to Bangalore. But I was here the past days and I was enlightened also. First of all, we went to a community, yeah, that one, and to see a community research center, to see how in the community, because a lot of patients are also in the community, to see how it works out and how the care is being given, and maybe what is possible, but also what is not possible. And so that was one. And on the other hand, it was really nice, and that's why I want to pay attention to this. We can think of all kinds of interventions for the individual patient, but the patient is living in the context of a family, of a society. And what I saw when we were in an activity center for older aged people, the importance of social interaction. So for the, let's say, the perceived health by the subject. So that's one aspect that I thought, and that we also saw in our interventions that we were doing. When you talk, for instance, about diet, nutrition, but also when you talk about exercise, the beauty of these interventions is that it's not targeted one organ or one system. No, it can have been beneficial effects on a whole range of aspects which are important for patients from a, let's say, positive health concept or happy health. I saw this here also in one of the buildings. So we need to know what does the intervention on, not only on physical function, but also on daily functioning, on mental well-being, on meaning, quality of life, and participation. And for that, I also want to tell that I was really interested with the new geriatric center that you are building. Not because it's a new building, and I've seen many new buildings being constructed over the past years in St. John's, but because of the concept. And I'm not going to talk about it, but because maybe you will talk about it. But this concept, which is being developed in this geriatric center, in fact, is the concept of the research and the insights that we got from our research during the past decades. And that's so I'm really looking forward to see how this will develop in the future. Then a last topic that I want to mention, is it still possible? Yes, is so prevention is key to target the societal problems. But you can have prevention in care to optimize the well-being of a patient that cannot be cured. I talked about the indicated prevention, so the prevention of specific target groups within a chronic disease, for instance, patients with a specific comorbidity. But also, I think we need to consider selective prevention. So we know that from a universal prevention point of view, a healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle is good for all of us. But we may also know that there are specific groups that have an increased risk for a specific chronic condition. And that's also the case for chronic respiratory disease. So we know more and more that it's not only stop smoking that is relevant for the onset and the progression of respiratory disease, but also diet. And my last slide will focus on that, because this is a nice review showing the risk factors for the development, the progression, and the morbidity from a respiratory health point of view. And then you know that there are noxious exposures, like smoking exposure, indoor air pollutants, which also here is a problem. But we should also consider individual and social factors, particularly a socioeconomic disadvantage as a risk factor. Early life risk factors such as premature birth, asthma, early respiratory infections, as well as, and that I did discuss, late life risk factors such as comorbidities and aging. And we do not know that well to what general external environment, as indicated in this list, is contributing. But it clearly also shows that there is a role for dietary management in the, let's say, in combating the progression of the lung health itself. So when we talk about nutritional prevention, we should consider it from birth to death. And there are two main biological mechanisms. The increased rate of lung function decline with age, like you also can see parallels with increased rate of muscle function decline with age or other functions, but also the role in abnormal lung development. And we did a systematic review about the role of diet as a risk factor for COPD, because I think it's not on the mind of many of us that it may also be risk factors for COPD. Then it has been clearly identified based on the studies available that an unhealthy diet may increase the COPD risk as well as accelerate the decline in lung function. And there are some individual food items that have been shown to have positive effects on lung health, the ones that I illustrated in green. And one specific item, processed meat, there is a lot of evidence that it does increase COPD risk. There's not that much data available regarding the role of diet in pulmonary function decline in COPD. but there is evidence that vitamin D supplementation may also have positive effects on the pulmonary function. What is important, why I tell this to you, because the relationship so far that has been demonstrated between diet and COPD risk is particularly high in smokers. So it's a synergy between the smoking and the unhealthy diet that strongly increase the risk. And it's not that surprising, because we did also a network analysis in the context of biological pathways. We do know that there are genetic factors, there are specific genes that increase the risk for a respiratory disease. But when you then link those to the pathways, then it's particularly those genes that are and pathways that are involved in inflammatory detoxification and tissue remodeling pathways, which partly I also described in my presentation. And those pathways, it's not surprising that they also can be influenced by diet. And another one, again, I'm not going into detail, but it's a hot topic. And I think perhaps also here is the interaction between the gut and the lung. And there are various, and there are various hypotheses. It's not that proven, but why this may be influenced. So the, how do you say, the relationship can be bidirectional, so the lung impairment can affect the gut, but the gut can also impact the lung, and this has been suggested to be related, but more research is needed to microbiota, dysbiosis, the function of the epithelial barrier, and increased intestinal permeability, as well as the influence of on systemic inflammation. And it is an interesting aspect also to consider in chronic respiratory disease, because we do have shown in advanced COPD that there can be anthracite damage, and also that there can be increased permeability, particularly during hospitalization for an acute exacerbation. So by this, I would like to finish my presentation. I gave you a bit of an overview of the work that we have been doing, again, realizing even from the pictures that is from a very Western perspective. But at least for me, I see that the insights has also contributed to insights that are relevant for other chronic diseases, because most chronic diseases are not limited to a specific organ, but they are systemic diseases. So and overall, I think these insights hopefully will also contribute to the aging research and to optimize interventions for elderly, ideally at a stage that that we try to prevent or can decrease, slow down the aging process. Thank you very much. Are there questions? Is there time for questions?
Thank you, Dr. Spurs, for that enthralling talk. And I think you got a very good overview about the challenges with COPD and maybe the interesting research, which might show us a path forward in combating it better in future. So we now open the floors for questions. So if you have any questions for Dr. Spurs, please put it forward. And as for our online participants, if you have any questions, kindly put it in the chat box and we'll put it across to Dr. Spurs. Over to you.
It was a great talk. I just wanted your thoughts on when you start looking at COPD patients, and the point that you brought with multimodal approach for treatment. What is your thought on, because in India we see a lot of vitamin B12 deficiency across whether it is subclinical or not. So do you have any thought on beyond vitamin D and nutritional intervention? B12 might play, that was my first. And the second is, in India, literature has shown in type 2 diabetes that mitochondrial dysfunction, something which was not shown by Nair and all. So it will be quite interesting to have your thoughts on, do you think that should the research be followed on mitochondrial oxidative capacity? So those are the two questions for B12 and mitochondrial.
Well, I think B12 is very interesting, and but this is this shows the advantage of international collaboration and cross-cultural collaboration, because the prevalence is higher here, I assume, than in our country, but there are still also patients in our country that suffer from B12 deficiency. So it might be interesting to think about setting up a study together to find out regarding the specific mechanisms that we have investigated in detail, whether what the influences of B12 deficiency. I know that it has been shown also, particularly there's a study, as I remember, in hospitalized patients. So I think it's worthwhile to explore the relevance in terms of specifically intervening for the processes that I mentioned. Mitochondrial dysfunction. You know that I called it a decreased mitochondrial capacity deliberately, because when we started this research, it was often confused with mitochondrial dysfunction. And I think dysfunction is really when there is a dysfunctional process on go. And that has been shown in, I can only tell from the COPD, but I think there are a lot of parallels with diabetes. So I think that what we see in the COPD patients as contributors to the impaired muscle function, and also perhaps partly to the cardiometabolic risk, there are similar processes as in diabetes. So the decreased mitochondrial biogenesis, the increased mitophagy, that's quite proven. But again, it has to do with the definition of mitochondrial dysfunction. But let's say it in this way, I think the mitochondria play a very important role. They play a role in, I think, in chronic disease management, but also in the context of aging. So in that sense, I think they need, if there are not that many explorations here, then I think it requires further investigation. But
I think we have a question now. Request you to kindly introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think it's on. I'm Neha, I'm a cell biologist here, and I'm interested in understanding if there is more knowledge about the cognitive involvement in COPD patients. What do you think? Are there correlations between, say, gut microbiome or a specific nutrient deprivation and cognition, or do you think it's the local innovations in the lung of neurons, nerves which initiate this?
I think it's a very interesting topic to investigate. We do not know that much, but I think the gut is an important target for intervention for these patients, both via directly the gut-brain axis, I think, as well as via the gut-muscle brain axis, and to what extent there is a group in the Netherlands investigating the direct effects of the gut on the lung. And I mean, if that would be the case, and there is some evidence, but then you have you ideally would have a very powerful intervention route. So like I said, we already decided to, in the last intervention study that is now ongoing, to target the gut by prebiotics, so not by symbiotics, which could be even more powerful. And we are now investigating the gut microbiome of these patients before and after the intervention. And then we can dive more, I think, into the direct effects on the lung and indirect effects on the brain, for instance. But yes, so I cannot say that much more than that. I think this is an area for future research, both from a treatment as well as a prevention point of view. That's why I positioned it. But we need to know more. But if you have ideas, it's interesting to explore. Yes.
I'm Dr. Ansula from Department of Medicine. I wanted to know, most of our patients either get inhaled steroids or sometimes systemic steroids. Was there a correlation between any biomarkers, inflammatory biomarkers in a patient who receives anti-inflammatory or directly indirect?
You mean whether the well, we do know that the systemic steroids will have an effect on the inflammatory markers. That's why they're so being given, I think. But the fact is that particularly we have proven that the systemic steroids in high doses really have a bad influence on the muscle, as you know. That was not the case with the inhaled steroids. So, and then there's the effect, the relative effect on the systemic inflammation versus the local inflammation. That's, well, one of the reasons of, yes, it does have an effect, but
they are not studied.
yeah, well, they have an effect, but you have to make a difference, I think, between the low-grade inflammation and in the stable condition, as well as the management of the acute exacerbations.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, sir, please introduce yourself.
My name is Dr. Ram.
Yeah.
And I would like to know the connection. I'm more interested in the gut-lung axis.
Yes.
For example, in case of COPD, there will be excess mucus.
Yeah.
Like the entrapment of the mucus in the lungs. For coming to the gut, when the mucus layer is breached, then only the dysbiosis mostly results in the breaching of mucus layer, and then it increases the permeability, intestinal permeability, right? So how do you connect these two things? So in one part where you have more mucus, in another part where you have less mucus. So what happens to this mucus secreting cells in these both organs when you have this intestinal permeability and COPD?
Well, I think it's a very good question, but I don't have the answer, but it's a very relevant. Yeah, I mean, this is a relatively unexplored area of research. So we know, we now have evidence that there is impaired gut function in advanced COPD, but we simply do not have a clue yet in how to, into the cause. So, but what you are saying makes sense to further investigate. So maybe we can discuss later your work and how we could transfer that to us. That's why I'm here also. I mean, I don't know everything. It's to see whether there are links and both from the fundamental research part as well as in the translation. So the projects, for instance, with Rohini on COPD, that's really to try to translate the insights that we are having here already to the situation here in India. It will hopefully also raise awareness, but obviously, I mean, it would be great if there are also in the basic research joint interactions where we can work both ways in towards more innovation in a sense.
I think that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank
Okay.
you once again, ma'am, for your time. And now I will request you to stay on the stage, Dr. Scholes. I will request you to remain on stage for a while. And I would like to invite Dr. Tony Raj, Dean St. John's Research Institute, to kindly hand over a very small token of our appreciation to Dr. Scholes.
Thanks so much. Oh, thank you. Oh, great. Thank you. Shall we do a picture? Yes. Not again. Do a picture. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Tony, and thank you, Dr. Scholes, once again. We are now ready for the second speaker for the day. And the second speaker for the day is Dr. Arvind Kasturi, Professor, Department of Community Medicine and the Chief of Medical Services, St. John's Medical College Hospital, as well as the team leader for the St. John's Geriatric Center project. And to introduce Dr. Kasturi, I would like to invite Dr. Ashwini Priyanka, Assistant Professor, Department of Physiology, St. John's Medical College, to please come on stage.
Thank you, Shinjini. I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Kasturi, who joined St. John's Medical College in 1993. He has contributed to more than 30 research papers and has been involved in practical community health activity as a trainer, evaluator, and resource person to programs in different parts of India. In the early 2000s, Dr. Kasturi developed an interest in the health of the elderly, resulting in the launch of the Senior Citizen Health Service at St. John's Medical College. Dr. Kasturi is the recipient of the B.M. Patil Memorial Oration Award of the Karnataka Association of Community Health and the Venkuba Rao Oration Award of the Indian Academy of Geriatrics on 2 occasions. In 2020, the Senior Citizen Health Service won the Indian Association of Preventive and Social Medicine Award for the best practice in community medicine. St. John's Medical College was awarded the prestigious Vayushreshta Samman Award of the Government of India in 2021 based on the work with the elderly. Currently, Dr. Kasturi is the leader of the team for the establishment of the St. John's Geriatric Center, a unique 125-bed, 7-story standalone facility on the St. John's campus, planned to deliver care, training, research, and community engagement services to elders and their caregivers. Dr. Kasturi enjoys teaching and igniting young minds and is the recipient of the Pioneers Award for Teacher of the Year 4 times at St. John's Medical College. Off the track, Dr. Kasturi is part of the Cause Foundation and the Kiara Silver Choral, promoting musical theatre in Bangalore and Mangalore in support of charitable causes. We are very privileged and excited to listen to your enthusiastic talk, sir. Over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Priyanka, for those kind words of introduction. Like I always say, I wish my mother were here to hear this, because to her, I'm just a guy who disappears in the morning, reappears in the evening, and is supposed to be doing something in between. So, and also, my apologies for coming in late. There was something in the hospital which resulted in somewhat accelerated aging for a little while. But anyway, that's how it is. But really, we had positioned this in such a way that I would begin with a kind of a bigger picture and get down to what Dr. Scholes spoke about, which is a lot of very, very useful information on respiratory health and research. However, as the fate would decide, it has happened the other way. I still bring greetings to you. And I generally start with this perspective, because public health and community medicine is where I come from. And population is what we see. And this is a picture of the Indian population. I mean, a random picture. I'm sure all of you are familiar with pictures like this, because one thing we have a lot of in India is people. And this is a picture just showing you something sort of tickle your mind about the Indian population. But in this population, there are all kinds of people. But today I'm focusing on one segment of that population and one phenomenon happening in that population, which is the phenomenon of aging and what we call the graying of the Indian population. Let me begin by acknowledging that all over the world, the population of elders is rising. We know that. And this particular figure I just put there just to bring to focus one phenomenon, which is somewhat unprecedented, which is going to happen in the year 2050, projected to happen. And that is the number of people aged 60 and above is going to exceed the number of children 0 to 14. It is an unprecedented demographic event, which is projected to happen about 25 years from now. Well, the WHO in its wisdom has declared this decade as the decade of healthy aging, 2021 to 2030. And that image actually has a lot to it. I mean, functional ability is the topic of almost 30 minutes of, we can speak on that, on intrinsic capacity and what the WHO means when they say the environments in which people grow and age. However, that is not the focus of what I'm speaking today. I'm coming back to this population, the elderly population in India. Now, obviously, all of us know that it's a large population because anything in India is a large population. But the population of those aged 60 and above has been steadily rising in each of our decadal censuses, starting from 1961 is where this figure speaks of. And we are now, the 2011 census was the last one. 2021, thanks to our good friend COVID-19, we did not have a decadal census. But today, we are expected to have a population of almost 150 million people aged 60 and above in this country. Now, millions roll off our tongue like single malt, very easily. But actually, if you think of that number, just pause and think of 150 million people aged 60 and above. That's more than the combined total populations of UK, Australia, New Zealand, and maybe about another 20 European countries put together. And that's just the population of senior citizens in this country. So it is a large population, and not just large, but that proportion of elderly people in our population is growing. Now, this figure starts, this graphic starts at 1950 and goes on projected till about 2100. And today, we have about 10.4 to 10.5% of our population aged 60 years and above. And that is projected to become 20.8% in the year 2050. I remember saying this statistic once in an undergraduate class in the afternoon. And somehow one fellow's eye and my eye kind of locked when I said the proportion of elderly people is rising. So I said, hey guy, why do you think it's rising? And his eye looked at my eye and I could see frantic things in his eye going, are elderly people reproducing elderly people, and stuff like that. But actually we know the truth, which is that life expectancy, which was just 35.8 years. A baby born in 1951, the projection of life at birth was 35 years. Today, we have doubled it at 69.8 or almost 70 years. A tremendous achievement by any means. And also, our total fertility rate, which is the number of children a woman would have in her reproductive span, has dropped from 6.1 in 1951 to just about what we call replacement level fertility now. And these are the demographic processes which have led to that increase in the aging population, the aged population as we go on. As far as where are these elderly people in this country? Most of our population still continues to be rural. No doubt the proportion of urban population is rising in this country. But as of the last census, almost 71.4% of the elderly people in this country live in its villages. And that has that has consequences, that has implications in terms of healthcare access, in terms of social support. The good things in the rural area are that social support sometimes tends to be a bit better than in the urban area. So there are goods and there are not so goods. But this is also a statistic worth remembering. The old age dependency ratio, which is simply the number of elderly people age 65 and above, right, compared with the number of what they call the working age group, which is 15 to 64. So that also is rising in this country, and that also has its implications. Now, in the midst of this elderly population, I'd like to draw your attention specifically to a vulnerable group, and that is the older woman. Now, this is the sex ratio of the elderly and the general population in this country. And sex ratio is simply the number of females per 1,000 males. Now, in the general population, we have an adverse sex ratio, unfortunately, even now, which is less than 1,000 females per 1,000 males. But in the elderly population, that is not true. We have 1,078 elderly females per 1,000 males, right? And that, okay, I'll show you another interesting, interesting depending on how you look at it. The single elderly woman is a particularly vulnerable segment within the population of elderly people, which means what? Which means among elderly men, among men aged 60 years and above, 15% of them, or 14.6 as this graphic would have us see, are single, which means they have lost their spouse. But of all elderly women, 47.8 or almost 50% are single. Now, that's obviously because women marry men who are older than them, and they keep going this way in parallel, and then the guy falls off. And then there's this single elderly woman who's carrying on. But from a demographic perspective and from a programmatic perspective, it is very important for us to remember this. And that perhaps explains why Dr. Scholes, when she went yesterday to Mugalur and went to that Rama Hiriyara Kendra, or the village elderly center, it was largely elderly women she saw, right? Health-wise, which is the focus of what we do in St. John's, we all know that the prevalence of acute chronic morbidity rises with age. And when you look at sheer prevalence figures among the elderly population, it's a very sobering statistic to know that almost a third to almost 40% have either an acute or a chronic morbidity, any chronic morbidity. And I just took bone and joint disease as an important morbidity because that's almost number 1 or number 2 in the list of morbidities that elderly people suffer from. Psychological distress and mental health, that's also another iceberg kind of an issue, where we see only perhaps a small portion on top, but we do not see what is hidden at the bottom. So, in other words, with all this population of elderly people, the question is, what are the challenges we are facing if we want to actually reach healthcare out to this population? What are the challenges we face? And I'm fond of presenting them as what I call the 5 A's. The first, access. Simple access or the lack of it. Now that access has several domains or determinants. Geographic access. Now, for example, in rural India, almost 40% of households were more than 5 kilometers away from the nearest health facility. Now that's okay. For you and me, we probably would take a 2-wheeler or a bicycle if we are Dr. Scholes, and we'll just go there. But for an older person, geographic access is an issue, as is physical access. And when we say physical access, we are looking at what proportion of elderly people are confined to their houses. Like you know, as expected, those aged 80 and older, as many as 1 in 5, almost 20% of the older elderly are confined to their houses. And that is a barrier to seeking access to healthcare. Well, the other domains, transport access, how do I get there? Social access, who takes me there? I mean, it's very fine to have a beautiful health center, but if there is an older person in a house, how does that older person actually go there? Mostly somebody has to accompany that person, and that's the determinant of social access. Other determinants, of course, I've already spoken about elderly women, caste, social class plague our population, with whichever segment you see, and economic independence or dependence, financial dependence. Well, that's the first A. The second, awareness of health literacy. We know that health literacy in our populations is rising. I mean, you just have to come to St. John's OPD and you will see the number of Google fueled health literacy events that we see. But health literacy among older populations, considering that 71% of that older population is rural, is a question that we need to ask. Is the level of awareness among our elderly people good enough? For example, these are a couple of studies which show that among those above 65, only a third had got their blood sugar checked and only a fifth their blood pressure checked. Now, this could be because of lack of access, no doubt about it. Many determinants, but one determinant definitely is lack of health literacy and the awareness that this is an important problem for me and I need to check it, right? So that's the second A. The third A is not a stranger to us at all, which is affordability. Now, our public health expenditure in our country, if you look at it from the central government point of view, is abysmally low. It was 1.6% of GDP in financial year 2021 and has climbed to 2.1%. We needed to reach almost 4 to at least 5%, and that's the indicator, right? More than 70% of expenditure on health occurs in the private sector. And that small pie chart on the side, which I'm afraid is not very visible, but the largest slice of that pie is what people spend on, and the largest slice is medications, right? So more than 70% of expenditure on health happens in the private sector. Catastrophic health expenditure and general health expenditure on healthcare, as expected, is higher as you grow older and older and older. So what is it that we need? We need a program where healthcare is available, affordable, accessible to elderly people at a cost at which they can afford it, right? And well, Ayushman Bharat, we've got a lot of schemes and programs which are coming up, and we certainly hope that they will make a difference in the lives of elderly people. The fourth A is what I call the absence phenomenon. Now, Dr. Scholes went to Mugalu. Let us say that we motivate an elderly person saying that, listen, for this condition, primary care is all very well. We've given you medicines, etc., but you need to visit a health center. You need to go to the next level. And after motivating that person to do that, they go to that health center and find that there's nobody there because somebody is absent. Now, this is our rural health statistics a few years back, which showed that in the government sector, out of a total of 1.5 lakh health sub-centers, this many lacked a female health worker, and almost half of them lacked something which I call more rare to see than the Indian tiger. The Indian tiger, at least you see occasionally, but a male health worker is something that is very, very difficult to find. And out of the requirement of so many doctors at a primary health center level, there were that many vacant positions. So human power and the absence of human power is another big problem confronting any chronic disease management, but especially an older person. So now that small graphic shows you who all are involved in the care of an older person. The family is still the primary caregiver. The health center staff, there is a cadre of geriatric nursing aide, geriatric physiotherapist, doctor, administrator, all of them, no doubt. And we need to really focus on how we are going to produce this human power to look after our huge, enormous elderly population. And the fifth A is accountability. I mean, I'm just throwing you a curveball here, where I ask this question: what is the health worker accountable for in his dealings with an elderly person or an elderly client? So he is accountable for competence. He needs to solve the problem that elderly person has. he or she is accountable to behave and conduct himself or herself in ethical community benefit, ensuring that whatever he or she does is ultimately for the benefit of that person, the client, and the community they come from. Adequacy of access, trying to break down that barrier of access, promote health at all times, and be very aware of what something costs. So how are we to improve accountability in our workforce? Of course, we must hire the right people, but then how do you find the right people? So many questions. I'm not getting into each one of those, but these are 5 A's that I'd like you to think about as you leave this hall, of the challenges that confront elder care in this country. Now, what has the state responded by doing? Now, we've got a whole host of measures which are social and economic, directed at older people. We've got social justice and empowerment with support to NGOs for construction of old age homes, residential facilities for older people. Banks are directed to give better interest rates and better saving schemes for older people. Income tax, LIC, travel concessions, and the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act. In India, there is a law which mandates that a child must take care of his older parent. And the parent can actually file a legal complaint if the child is not taking care of him or her. It's an interesting act, and I'd recommend that you just kind of Google it and have a look at it. And food security-wise, we've got a couple of schemes which give food grain and food security support to older people. But this is a finding from the LASI study. I'm sure you must have heard of the longitudinal aging study in India, LASI. And this shows you the prevalence of knowledge and awareness about these schemes, some of which I just put up there. The first one is the IGNOAPS. NOAPS is the National Old Age Pension Scheme and the Widow Pension Scheme. Those about 40 to 50% awareness across groups. But the Annapurna scheme, which is the food grain scheme, and the others have a lower level of awareness. In other words, there are these schemes, but the number of older people who know about them. And the next one is the awareness of concessions given by government. If you look at the India figure, it's about 28.4% of older people know about concessions given by the government for them. So in other words, even though we have schemes, the coverage, the awareness, and the utilization of these schemes still leaves something to be desired. Now, this is the healthcare scheme, the National Program for Healthcare of the Elderly. Very well conceived at every level. At the domiciliary level, what needs to be done, at the primary health center level, what needs to be done. But again, it's conceived well, but we don't yet have a formal evaluation of this program. But early impressions tell us that still we have a way to go. So there is obviously much to do. There is obviously much to know. And we're very grateful for collaborators like Dr. Scholes for telling us the enormous possibilities in terms of research. For example, if you say much to know, the research canvas, looking at it from the public health perspective point of view, I've just put some random research questions here, which we would probably need answers for. What are the major healthcare disparities among elderly populations in India? How can we address these disparities to ensure equity so that everybody gets what they deserve? Another, what interventions can help in preventing and managing chronic disease using perhaps technology-based solutions? For that, always remember the 71.4% living in a village, not necessarily the elderly population in Koramangala 4th block. What are the prevalence rates of mental health problems among elderly people? We know that it's high, yes, but what can we do about it? Is there a simple intervention? Are there groups? There are proven interventions which can be actually given to improve mental health status among elderly people. But how much of it is actually reaching the people? And that other hand, what is the burden of caregiving in our Indian population for elderly people? Do we have a large caregiver burden? Are we there to support the caregiver of the elderly? And I'm sure there are plenty of research questions like this of different colors, shapes, and sizes. Now, I'm just leaving you with what Dr. Scholes, we were happy to have her see, which is our dream project of the St. John's Geriatric Center. Thanks to the support of St. John's, the management, and thanks to the support of so many people in the public who have come and supported us, we have started constructing this center. And we have reached the slab on the 4th floor now, with 2 more floors to go. It's a ground plus 6 structure. And this center stands on 4 pillars. The pillar of care, where the hospital will continue to provide acute care, but that center will be there for what we call rest, healing, and rehabilitation of elderly people. Training. Who is the workforce who's going to take care of our population as it grows older? 2050, I told you 20.8% of the population is expected to be a senior citizen, which means 1 in 5 Indians is an elderly person. Now, that's a very sobering statistic, translating to almost 350 million people age 60 and above. Who is going to take care of those who need care in that group? Do we need to train the workforce? And that's hopefully one of the pillars on which this center stands. Community engagement with elders, their caregivers, to keep the wellness principles still alive among elderly people. And of course, research on aging and geriatrics. The 3rd floor of the center is going to house the CRAG, the Center for Research on Aging and Geriatrics. We'd be most happy to have people collaborate on ideas for improving research among older people. So, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, the large, growing, majority rural population of elders, and that a single dependent older woman as a particular vulnerable subgroup in this group, with a high burden of physical, mental, and social morbidity. Challenges I presented to you as the 5 A's of access, awareness, affordability, absence, and accountability. State has responded. I mean, we are very, very grateful for all the programs that are there by the state for older people. But we need to improve the awareness, coverage, and utilization of these programs. Many areas for research and action, and I think the time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arvind, for this enlightening session on the challenges being faced by the graying Indian population, as you so eloquently put it, and hopefully the centers, like the Geriatric Center of St. John's, we will be able to come back better in the future. So we now open the floor for questions. So if anybody has any questions, and this as the same way as Dr. Scholes, online participants, please put your questions in the chat room. Please go ahead.
Commenting on this picture of the women I also showed this picture to my husband. He was wondering whether the men were watching cricket.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dr. Scholes is talking about her visit to the Grama Hiriyara Kendra. When we started the village elder center in Mugalur, and we've got it in 4 villages now, even we were surprised that initially a few men also came. And then over a period of time, it became entirely women. And we asked the men, I mean, what happened? Why aren't you coming to the center? They said, no, I mean, it's so largely ladies, you know, I mean, like we feel a little odd. But the truth of the matter is that the single elderly women or elderly women in general are a little more active, a little more vibrant, I see, than the elderly men. I mean, not to cast any aspersions on gender, but no, Dr. Scholes, nobody of that demographic here. So that's why I'm boldly speaking. But yes, it is an important point. But the elderly woman within the population of elders is a vulnerable segment. Yes.
Any more questions?
maybe not a question for this forum, though, what are your thoughts about traditional medicine and geriatric issues? Do you have any strong opinions one way or the other?
Well, the way we look at it is, if you look at the top 10 morbidities among older people, almost all of them are allopathically incurable. So if traditional medicine is able to provide some form of relief to any one of them, bone and joint problems are the classic example. Allopathic medicine has physiotherapy to offer and painkillers, and of course, interventions involving surgery. But if traditional medicine can step in areas like that and provide relief, which is far more acceptable, far easier on the pocket, far more affordable to older people, we would welcome it. And in fact, one of the things that we are repeatedly asked in the upcoming geriatric center is whether you're going to have some form of traditional medicine or non-allopathic medical either services or research or anything happening there. And I think we should. Yes, absolutely.
I think we have one more question now.
The nutritional intake in the rural setup is quite different. What's your thought on what are the roles of nutrition intervention? Because that is something which is considered.
Well, we have Binu here, who did a study on assessment of nutritional status among elderly people in a rural area. But yes, we do agree that the diet itself is slightly different in the rural area. For example, we are used to sitting at the geriatric clinics to say, take this 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, when the guy says, I eat only 2 meals a day, in the morning and in the evening. So dietary patterns are different and dietary intake is different. So is there scope for nutritional supplementation, nutritional research on older people? Yes, I certainly do think so. The nutritional pattern has changed. And even there, we see a lot of polished grains and abdominal obesity and risk factors, traditional risk factors for things like cardiovascular disease. So I think the more we look at traditional diet patterns and see what we can learn from that and try those interventions in the rural area, I think that would be good. That's definitely an area which we should do some work in.
Any other questions out there? Okay, there are no more questions. Then we close this session. And I would once again like to invite Dr. Tony Raj, Dean at St. John's Research Institute, to kindly come on stage and hand over a token of appreciation to Dr. Arvind.
Thank you.
We request you to stay seated for a little while longer. We are arriving to the end of this wonderful afternoon that we've been having. But before we close, we would like to welcome Dr. Ashwini Priyanka, Assistant Professor, Department of Physiology, to please come on stage and deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing team.
It is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. On behalf of St. John's National Academy of Health Sciences, I would especially like to thank Dr. Scholz and Dr. Arvind Kasturi for delivering this wonderful talk on healthy aging. Thank you, Dr. Scholz, for throwing light on the importance of nutrition and its role in preventing accelerated aging. It was an enriching experience to listen to you and also getting to know newer research ideas. Thank you, Dr. Arvind Kasturi, for enlightening us on various aspects of how to age healthily and also throwing light on elderly care in India. Your respective talks were very informative and insightful. I'm sure we have a lot of lessons to take over from here. We heartily appreciate you for accepting our invitation to deliver this talk in spite of your busy schedule. I would like to thank Dr. Tony Raj, Dean, SJRI, for your continued support and guidance in all our endeavors. I would like to thank Dr. Sucharita and Dr. Preetesh and all the faculty involved in organizing this event and making it a grand success. My gratitude also goes out to all the members in the technical team and other administrative bodies for lending your support. I thank all the participants, online and offline, other executives, faculty invitees, and guests for taking time this evening to attend this seminar. Wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
With that, we come to the end of this amazing afternoon that we've been having. Hope you all have had an equally mind-stimulating experience like me. And please note that we have made arrangements for high tea just outside. So make sure to grab your refreshments before going out. And thank you all for attending. And I have been your host, Shinjini Bhattacharya. Thank you very much.